Chapter 10. Sunday, 3 p.m. The Ryanair Boeing 737 touched down at John Paul II International Airport in Krakow with a satisfying thud, followed by screeching from the engines as the pilot used reverse thrust to bring the plane to taxiing speed. Krakow was already cold, but not as yet in the grip of the full Polish winter. Outside the doors leading from baggage claim to arrivals, a man with a completely shaved head stood with a piece of white cardboard bearing the four letters HAYS, written freehand in black marker. He was dressed in some sort of black combat suit, with a short jacket and black pants, although there were no obvious signs that he was carrying any weapons. He introduced himself and showed the two Irish detectives to a waiting Skoda parked quite illegally on a yellow hatched area directly outside the terminal. It was an unmarked police car, but very obviously so, with its multiple radio aerials and other equipment scattered around the dashboard inside. Their unnamed escort drove them briskly to the centre of town, pointing out some of the major landmarks of the city on the way. The two detectives were booked into the Radisson Blu and were surprised at the very modest rate for the 2 rooms in a 5-star hotel. It certainly lived well up to its rating, with a very simple but elegant reception area and inviting bar. They were allocated rooms 220 and 221. A pair of rooms opposite each other on the second floor. Hayes carried the 2 small cabin bags that they had brought with them to their rooms. "Let's meet in half an hour or so downstairs. We can plan our strategy for tomorrow," he said. "Good idea," Lyons replied, letting herself in. When Maureen came down about 40 minutes later, Hayes had ordered her a gin and tonic and was halfway through his first ever Polish beer. "Thanks, boss," she said, sitting down opposite Hayes, a small black piano table between them. "Just what the doctor ordered," she said, holding up her glass and taking a good swig of the cold liquid. "So, we have a meeting with Inspector Kowalski at 9:30 tomorrow. He seems quite amenable to letting us interview Pawlowski. I'm not sure how it'll work, though." "Do you think he'll bring him into the station?" Hayes asked. "I'm not sure how it works out here. It would be good if they got him in. Do you think we need to prepare a list of questions?" she asked. "No, I don't think so. We're pretty good together, and I'd prefer just to go with the flow. You okay with that?" "Yeah, sure. It's pretty obvious what we need to get him for in any case," Lyons said. A full confession to murdering his sister would be a good start. They had another drink and went out for a walk around the city. It was cold but not unbearable, and the city had some very fine buildings and a surprising amount of green open space. They left the hotel and headed east across the squares of Krakow towards the Planty Park. They passed the magnificent facade of the Jagiellonian University and on to the Rhein-Colony, the 13th century square right at the heart of the city. There was a mixture of architectures, going from the majestic 17th and 18th century buildings through to the bland and faceless communist-era blocks right up to the modern glass and grey metal offices that one sees in all modern cities these days. They pressed on to St. Mary's Basilica with its twin towers and caught the trumpet call at 6 o'clock when the basilica emitted a high-pitched clarion sound, as it had done for several centuries. They finished their walk at the edge of the Westerplatte and made their way back to the centre, passing the Romanesque church of St. Wojciech with its vast Baroque dome that had stood since the 11th century. Later, after a good meal and a bottle of German wine, they made their way back to the hotel. At the bedroom doors, Hayes said good night, and then as she opened her door, he added, "Would you like some company tonight?" Maureen immediately felt the butterflies in her stomach erupt. She said nothing, but went into her room holding the door open for him to follow. With the morning light, Hayes was struggling to see how things between them could be normal and professional again after the night they had spent together. But Maureen seemed to sense his anxiety, and at breakfast she put her hand over his and quietly said, "What happens in Krakow stays in Krakow." When Hayes and Lyons left the hotel to head to the police station, the weather had changed. They were met with bitterly cold, thin wind that sliced down the narrow street like a blade. Neither of them had thought too much about what clothing they'd bring to Poland, so they were ill-equipped for the Polish weather. Thankfully, the police station was not very far away. It was an old 19th century building that stood formidably on a wide, busy street. As soon as they entered the building, they were greeted by a strong institutional smell, a mix of old wood, dust, and carbolic soap. The walls were painted in pale green gloss paint, and the floor was a sort of grey mottled terrazzo, worn down at the entrance from countless feet trampling over it. It was also cracked here and there in the hallway. Inside the door, A long, dimly lit corridor stretched away with high oak doors in pairs to the left and right. The doors had small beveled glass panes down to chest height, so you could see into the room. The first pair of doors on the left-hand side had the word Receptia painted in white on a blue board stuck to the front, which they took to be the reception area. This area itself was a big, bright room with a carved oak counter to the right-hand side. Two young officers, both female, sat behind the counter in smart blue shirts adorned with various gold-coloured badges. The nearest officer, a brunette in her late 20s, with her hair held back in a ponytail, was called Hannah according to her lapel badge. She was the first to speak, but unfortunately in Polish, which of course neither Hayes nor Lyons understood. "We are here to see Inspector Kowalski," Hayes said, hoping that Hannah spoke English. "Ah, sorry, of course. You are the Irish police. I'm sorry," Hannah said in perfect English, with just the slightest hint of an accent. "He's expecting you. If you go out to the hall," she said, gesturing with her hand to the corridor they had come from. "Left and up the stairs one flight, his office is the second door on the left." Hayes knocked on the solid oak door. It was opened by a large man in his 50s with thinning dark hair and a ruddy face. He must have been at least 6'3" in height, and while not particularly overweight, he was bulky, with broad shoulders and steely grey eyes. He wore a drab suit that had frankly seen better days, and a dark shirt with a navy blue tie. "Welcome," he boomed. "Come in. Sit down. You must be frozen. I hope you had a pleasant night at the Radisson Blu. I hear it's quite good." Kowalski ushered the detectives to two well-worn office chairs in front of his desk. "Coffee?" he asked. "Yes, please," they replied in unison. Kowalski sat behind his desk and barked some instructions into the old, pale grey rotary dial phone, presumably ordering the coffee. "Well, I believe we have a person of interest here in Krakow for you," he said, shuffling some papers that appeared, from what Hayes could decipher reading upside down, were relevant to Piotr Pawlowski. Kowalski went on. "I have done a bit of snooping around Mr. Pawlowski. There's not a lot. He comes from a family of 4 children and their parents here in Krakow. His father is retired, used to be in insurance. Piotr followed his father into the same company. He has 2 sisters, Lisa and Anna, and a brother Jacob. Both parents are still alive, and Piotr lives with them in an apartment quite close to the centre," Kowalski said. "What's your interest in this man?" Lyons gave an outline of the events concerning the death of Lisa Pawlowski in the west of Ireland and told Kowalski of P's premature return to Poland the day after she had been found dead. "We'd like to interview him if that's possible," Hayes said. "Do you think he killed his sister?" Kowalski asked. "It's certainly a possibility, but we are keeping an open mind for now. We don't even know what they were doing 70 kilometers from her flat out in an unpopulated area in dreadful weather," Hayes said. "Right, well, I'll have him picked up at once, and you can interview him here with one of my officers as soon as he gets here," he said, reaching again for the telephone. Hayes and Lyons were shown to a small room further down the corridor. It was bright but sparsely furnished with just a desk and 2 chairs, a phone and some plastic cups and a bottle of spring water. The most important piece of equipment in the room was an old cast-iron central heating radiator which was giving off a huge amount of heat, making the room seem almost cozy despite its barren appearance. They had brought Kowalski's file on Piotr that he had given them. Much of it was in Polish, but there was sufficient in English to allow them to go through it. Piotr was the eldest of the 4 Pawlowski children. There was a face picture of him in the file, presumably taken for his passport. He had short, curly, fair hair and an oval face with stark, pale blue eyes and a full mouth. The file had all sorts of details about the man: his school, his work, where he had been on holidays for the last 5 years, his salary, and details of the company he worked for, along with all sorts of reference numbers relating to him. It also had a sheet outlining his medical history, showing that he had broken one of his arms on a skiing holiday a few years ago. The Irish detectives were amazed at how much information the file contained. It was much more than they were allowed to see on any individual back home. "Any thoughts?" Hayes asked Lyons. "Not a lot. I'm impressed with all the information they can pull up. And while we're at it, did you notice how Kowalski knew where we were staying even though we didn't tell him?" Lyons added. "The driver from the airport probably told him. But we were also followed when we went walkabout yesterday afternoon. There were 2 of them, a man and a woman, and they stuck with us all the way round. I'm surprised you didn't spot them. Shit, I missed that. Some detective I am. But I wasn't looking for anything. I guess we're just not used to that level of scrutiny. That's why there are two of us. And you're a damn fine detective, Maureen. One of the best I've worked with. Thanks, but that's pretty basic. The Poles haven't lost all their techniques from the communist era, it seems. I wonder what they'll use to pull in Piotr, Hayes said. Probably ask him if he has a license for those eyes, Lyons said, smiling. Oh, I see. Fancy him, do you? Let's see if he's a murderer first, then I'll tell you, she replied. Kowalski knocked on the door and came into the room. We have him downstairs. He wasn't too happy to be lifted from work. I want to leave him for a few minutes before we talk to him, though. Let him contemplate his situation, Kowalski said. What did you learn from the file? Not a whole lot, though it's very thorough. Sergeant Lyons thinks he's nice eyes, Hayes said. Grunted Kowalski. I have a few calls to make. Can we meet downstairs in, say, 20 minutes? He said. He's in room A4 and the guards will let you through. You can get more coffee at the front desk if you need it. It was nearly 11:30 when the three detectives entered room A4 to find Piotr Pawlowski sitting alone at a small table in the room looking nervous. He was even better looking than his passport photo portrayed, but there was a vacuousness about him that no paper picture could ever convey. Kowalski introduced the two Irish detectives and signalled to them that they should take over. Mr. Pawlowski, as you know by now, your sister Lisa was found dead in the west of Ireland last Tuesday. We are investigating her death, and we have come here to question you as you were in the area at the time, Hayes said. I want you to tell us everything from the beginning, why you travelled to Ireland, and then everything that happened from the time you arrived until the time you left again on Wednesday. I haven't done anything wrong. She was my sister and I loved her, Pawlowski blurted out. That's not what we asked you, Mr. Pawlowski. Now you need to answer our questions, or you will be here for a very long time, Lyons said. Okay, I came across Lisa's webpage one day at work when I put her name into Google. It was disgusting. How could she do that? We are a good family. My parents think she's in Ireland studying. And there she was, selling her body. I couldn't believe it at first. It was horrible. So I decided to go there and confront her. Get her to stop. I called her and said I was coming over for a few days' holidays and could we go around and see the places which I heard were very beautiful. I told her I would hire a car, he said. So you arrived in Dublin on the Monday and hired a car, Lyons confirmed. Yes, and drove to Galway on your fabulous wide road with no traffic, he smiled. When did you meet up with Lisa? Lyons went on. Tuesday. She told me to call her after 4 in the afternoon. She had things to do until then. I stopped by her apartment and she came out soon after 4. She wanted to go for a drive, even though it was starting to get very grey and dark. She said it was always like that in Galway. She had heard that Clifton was nice, and asked if we could go there. We drove out in that direction, Pawlowski said. How did you know how to get there? Lyons asked. I have Google Maps on my phone, Piotr replied. Go on then. You drove out to Clifton, Hayes prompted. No, we drove out in that direction, but we started arguing. I started to ask her about what she was doing. You know, the page on the internet. I told her if her parents found out, it would kill them. And anyway, it was disgusting. She was a perfectly respectable girl in Poland with good prospects. She didn't need to do that. He was getting animated now, and he remembered the row with his sister. His cheeks were beginning to colour, and a fire had come into his steely blue eyes. Go on, prompted Lyons. We got to a town with a narrow bridge and a sharp bend across a river. The town name begins with O, but I couldn't pronounce the name. And we were shouting at each other. It was horrible. So I turned the car around and drove back to the city in silence and left her at the door of the apartment, Pawlowski said. What time was this? Hayes asked. I'm not sure. Probably around 6, I would guess. Maybe 6:30. What did you do then? Hayes asked. I went back to my hotel. I was very upset. Things had not gone the way I had hoped. I thought she would see reason, see what harm she could be doing to our family. But I had failed to persuade her. I had some food in my room and then decided to change my flight and go back to Krakow. I logged on and changed my flight to Wednesday, he said. Hayes looked at Lyons and decided to end the interview for the time being. They would be able to check out parts of his story to see if he was telling the truth. Outside the room, Hayes asked Lyons what he thought of Pawlowski's story. I think it's bullshit, but right now we can't prove it. How could she have got from Uachtaráin to Ballyconneely unless he drove her? Lyons said. They asked Kowalski how long they could keep the man in custody. As long as you like, but sometimes it's better to let them go, but watch them. He will think he has got away with it, and maybe slip up. I agree, said Lyons. Anyway, it will take us some time to check up with the hotel and see if he's telling the truth. I'll release him then, but don't worry, we have his passport, and he will be watched carefully until you need him again, the Polish officer declared. They had no doubt that he would. Thanks. Can we get an office with an international phone for the afternoon, please? Hayes asked. Sure, you can use my office. I have to go to one of the other stations for a meeting. Will you be here tomorrow? Yes, though that will be our last day. The Irish taxpayer won't fund us for longer than a couple of days. Hayes and Lyons settled into Kowalski's office with a sandwich apiece and 2 large cardboard cups of strong coffee. Lyons got on the phone to Galway and spoke to Eamon Flynn. After a few jokes about foreign holidays, they got down to business. Lyons asked him to check with juries to see if Pawlowski had ordered food in his room last Tuesday evening. She asked him to check if it was a single meal, and more importantly, what time it was served. She then asked him to get onto the car hire company and find out exactly how many kilometres Pawlowski had clocked up during the hire period. She also asked Flynn to confirm the round-trip distance between Jury's Inn in Galway and both Ballyconneely and Uachtarard. Finally, she asked him to get back onto Ryanair to confirm the time that Pawlowski had changed his flight. Flynn said he would get John O'Connor to help him, and then asked to speak to Mick Hayes. Flynn told Hayes that Lisa Pawlowski's phone company had been back in touch. They had managed to identify another number that had called Lisa in the days before her death from her phone. It was made from a pay-as-you-go customer, but he had topped up using a credit card, and they had been able to trace him through that. Hayes told Flynn to track the man down and get him in for questioning. Flynn reported that there was no word back yet on the detailed forensics from Lisa's apartment. Flynn said that the lab was having a hell of a time separating out all the DNA from her bedsheets and waste paper bin. Lisa had been a busy girl. Hayes reminded Flynn to get Jim Dolan to call on the Lake Guest House and check up on Ciara O'Sullivan's story about the curtains, and more particularly to see if there was a passenger in the car when she called. By 5 o'clock Krakow time, Flynn was back onto Hayes. Hayes put his mobile on speaker, so Lyons could join in the conversation as well. Well, first, Pawlowski did have a meal in his room in Galway on Tuesday. He had a burger and a bottle of Heineken, and it was delivered at 10 minutes past 10 according to the night kitchen staff that run the room service up to midnight when the main kitchens are closed. Then there's the hired car. If Pawlowski had driven to Uachtarard and turned back, then adding the return trip to Dublin Airport and a few kilometres for running around, there would be around 600 kilometres covered in all. But Hertz confirmed that the car had actually done 720 kilometres, so there's an extra 120 to account for. And yes, you guessed it, that's just about the exact round-trip distance that would have gotten him out to Ballyconneely via Roundstone and back, Flynn reported. That's great work, Eamon, well done. Is there anything on Lisa's other mysterious caller yet? It seems he's a travelling salesman for a paint company in Dublin, out in the Ballymount estate. He has several speeding tickets picked up on the N6. Looks like he comes to Galway once a fortnight on Tuesdays and stays overnight. The Dublin boys are getting him in for a chat. When will you 2 holiday makers be back, boss? Flynn asked. Very funny. We leave tomorrow afternoon, but I want another hour or 2 with the brother before we go anywhere. He's been telling us porkies, Hayes said. Oh, and there's one other thing, boss. The hotel says that Pawlowski's hire car re-entered the car park at 9:12 p.m. on Tuesday. They issued tickets at the barrier that residents get stamped at the hotel reception. It seems they don't own the car park, or it's operated by someone else at least. Their system keeps records and has CCTV at the entrance, so they're quite positive about the time. That's really good work, Eamon. We'll make a real detective out of you yet. Thanks again. When the call was over, the 2 detectives used the blackboard in Kowalski's office to build a timeline of Piotr Pawlowski's movements on the Tuesday. 2 things are clear, Lyons said. He obviously drove out well past Uachtarard with the girl in the car, according to the mileage and the time he got back to the hotel. And the other? Hayes asked. He's lying through his teeth. Kowalski hadn't returned when the 2 detectives left the police station and walked back through the narrow, windswept streets to their hotel. It hadn't warmed up any, so when they got in, they went straight to the bar and had a large brandy apiece to warm them through. On the way to the rooms, Maureen said that she needed a shower before going out to eat. She got to her door, opened it with the plastic keycard, and turned to Hayes saying, I need some company, and held the door open for him.